literally it's resistance training, but people resist the resistance training, even though from a diabetes standpoint, it does so many amazing things. But I think out of the gate, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, it seems really scary, I don't want to go into a gym, like what would be, from your perspective, what would be your initial spot to send someone to say, hey, I want you to get into lifting. I want you to enjoy the process. Where would you start somebody out?
Yeah, I really would want to ask them like 20 questions to understand where that fear is coming from, because it could come from, gym intimidation for females, I see that a lot. It could come from a lack of confidence, a fear of injury, I don't know what to train, or, hey, I've been to the gym for years and I don't get results, so I hate it, right? It's where does the fear come from? And then we dig in and say, okay, let's unlock the piece that will turn that around for you and help you not only reframe it, but get the proof of the pudding by doing something for not too long of a period and getting the measurable results that tell you this thing works. And I think I'm going to keep doing this.
Coach, and I've lived myself with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years, and I am here to share everything that I have learned in both my personal and professional experience so you can live that incredible diabetes life. So get ready and let's dive right into today's episode.
What is going on? Welcome to this episode of the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, where I've got my new friend here who is a workout master, and I'm just excited to talk all things lifting, training, to make sure that you listening have better blood sugars as a person living with diabetes. What's going on, Philip?
What's going on, man? And I'll add to that, I want you to have fun. I want you to enjoy becoming a lifter because it's fun.
I was gonna say, lifting, I feel like it's something I talk about with people. We talk about with patients all the time, where it's so critical to great blood sugars. And people resist it all the time. Literally, it's resistance training, but people resist the resistance training, even though from a diabetes standpoint, it does so many amazing things. But I think out of the gate, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, it seems really scary, I don't want to go into a gym, like what would be, from your perspective, as we'll dive into there first, then we'll circle back and kind of talk about your background too. But what would be your initial spot to send someone to say, hey, I want you to get into lifting. I want you to enjoy the process. Where would you start somebody out?
Yeah, I really would want to ask them like 20 questions to understand where that fear is coming from, because it could come from, gym intimidation for females, I see that a lot. It could come from a lack of confidence, a fear of injury, I don't know what to train, or, hey, I've been to the gym for years and I don't get results, so I hate it, right? It's where does the fear come from? And then we dig in and say, okay, let's unlock the piece that will turn that around for you and help you not only reframe it, but get the proof of the pudding by doing something for not too long of a period and getting the measurable results that tell you this thing works. And I think I'm going to keep doing this.
Well, and before we go in even deeper, tell people just your background so that I was like, wait, he's talking about lift. He knows his stuff, but who is this guy? So tell a little bit about you and your background so people are like, okay, I got it now.
Sure, man. I'm just a lifting enthusiast who loves this stuff, and it just happened to translate into other passions like podcasting and coaching and educating and teaching. So my background is in engineering. I'm a very data analytical nerd type of guy, software engineering specifically. And so I love how things come together and how to measure and systems-based thinking. And I think the body lends itself really well to that kind of approach. And about 5 years ago, after 15, 20 years of doing all the things that don't work, I started to really get into what we call evidence-based fitness, evidence-based training. One of the most impactful books for me actually was The Muscle and Strength Pyramids by Dr. Eric Helms and Andy Morgan. And then I found Starting Strength. And then I found like Alan Aragon and Dr. Bill Campbell and all those guys. And it kind of led to a rabbit hole where they're all connected on podcasts and YouTube and everything and books, where during the pandemic, I started to learn a lot about proper strength training and then later on nutrition. And then the podcast came out of that because I was so excited to say, man, you guys, you ever heard of this stuff? Like this stuff works, people. I've been keto and intermittent fasting and like high reps at the gym and nothing's ever worked for me. And all of a sudden I found something that worked. Let me share it. And then like 6 months later, someone said, you got to be my coach. Like, do you do that? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Let me go figure that out. And so I went and became a coach. And so I've been doing that for like 3 or 4 years now.
I was going to say the names you're dropping, first of all, I've got memory lane going on. And second of all, I spent the time way back, like Alan Aragon, I think I found in like 2013. So I was reading some of his stuff when Lane Norton was coming out initially. I'm reading his stuff. This is part of, for people listening, this is part of what led me to become a dietitian and then eventually go into diabetes, because I'm learning all this stuff about lifting and nutrition. And then I'm realizing this all has to apply to people with diabetes too. And so you're naming these names, and I'm over here just like, holy smokes, this is just absolutely insane and so much fun. And I'm just like, there's so many things we could do. And then with your engineer brain, I'm like, there's so much offline I want to talk about. But besides that, so you obviously were like, hey, I need to figure out the body as a system. I've got these names. I've got this nutrition background. I've got this exercise and training background. And it obviously shaped you to where you are right now. But with the training, going back to the initial stuff, with people getting into the gym, they're like, hey, I'm struggling. You find out what that fear is or what that concern is. And let's just say, like, we've talked to patients who are like, I don't even want to go into a gym. What would be a reasonable starting point for someone who's, hey, I know I have diabetes. I know I need to do something to strengthen my body. What could somebody do that would be super straightforward? That'd be a very easy starting point to start seeing quick wins.
Man,
it's tough, right?
I know.
One element of like training, lifting, periodization. And we're just like, well, we got to start small and then build our way out. Right?
I always like to meet people where they're at. So because I do get this question all the time. And that's why it's such a hard question, because I know there's not a one size fits all answer. Literally every day you get this question. And I used to be kind of a dick about it and have my dogma and have my like, this is how you do it. You got to go do starting strength 3x5, pick up a barbell. Like that is effective. And it is effective. It's a great tool, but you may not have access to it. You may have gym intimidation. You may have a history of back problems, and the list goes on. So the question again is, what is your goal, right? Like I have to start there. What is your goal? Are you asking me for a reason? Do you know the reason? Like, why do you think this is the right thing to do? And in your population, it might be because I heard you say it helps with insulin sensitivity. Right. Is that enough of a driver for you? It might be life-changing, right? If medical issue, but you're still not going to believe it until you see it. So I'm going to be, again, I have to ask questions of you, and you can ask yourself, like, do you have a gym nearby? Or do you know what you're doing when you go there? Like, do you understand the equipment and what to do? If not, personal trainer, a coach, like just start there right off the bat. You have to find a good one. Reach out to Ben, reach out to me. We'll point you to a good one if it's not us, and use that to learn about the skill of lifting. It is a skill. It's like any skill. If you're going to pick up an instrument and learn a clarinet, like, where do you start? I don't know. Probably find a teacher.
Yeah. Well, I joke with people with diabetes, right? It's the same thing of, hey, you get diagnosed, you don't know where you're starting at. There goes my camera, and there it comes back. There, you don't know where you're starting at with diabetes, so you have to find somebody who does know. And if your doctor says, hey, you need to do this for lifting, you need to start getting some strength training in, the adaptation of the body and how important it is just remarkable. Like, and I know you'll appreciate this given your data background. There's a patient I can think of vividly where he usually lifts 4 days a week, pretty active guy, late 20s, and his blood sugars were doing pretty solid. And he had just 1 week where he did not lift any weights at all. And this is just to illustrate for people from a blood sugar standpoint, no weights. His average blood sugar went up 25 points. Everything else was the same. Food was the same. Sleep was the same. Normal day to day, but just no lifting. And that was the difference. And I'm like, holy cow, 25 points, almost an entire A1C point. And in that case, from a long-term diabetes perspective, that's enough to put somebody potentially at a much higher risk of long-term complication just from not doing something that doesn't have to take forever. So I think from an efficiency standpoint, I think a lot of people get intimidated. I got to be in the gym for hours at a time. Everybody says I have to be there for 90 minutes or 2 hours, and I don't have that. I barely have 35 minutes. What could someone do to become more efficient? So they kind of just, if they get over that first hump of, I'm going to try this, then how can I be in and out and efficient, make sure my body's safe at the same time?
Yeah, and that's a good one, because it goes to the question of when people say, can I start with bands or body weight or dumbbells? Like if I have those at home, and to the topic of exercise snacks and being efficient from a very minimalist standpoint. And so I can go one of two directions there. One direction is if you've got some basic equipment at home, you can probably do some movement patterns that will load you up with resistance and challenge your body enough to get the stimulus that you're looking for that will start to inch down your blood sugar and all the other things. But you're going to outgrow them pretty quickly, but at least it gets you a taste for that. And then you can say, what do I need next at home or in the gym? If you're going to a gym and you don't have a home gym, because that's another hack we should get into for efficiency, a big hack, is you can lift 2 or 3 days a week. And I was looking at the insulin research as well, and like 1 to 2 sessions a week is almost enough to give you a stimulus. But you also have to create consistency and a routine around it. So I do like the idea of like Monday, Wednesday, Friday every week, for example, for 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes. And you could do 3 lifts in a moderate rep range and get all the intensity, volume, and frequency you need as a beginner for the next 6 to 12 months to make massive progress and get what you need. So just the premise that you even have to spend that much time is busted when you realize there's an efficient minimalist way to do it that gets you the result.
And I feel like people are so oh my God, I have to be there and do 15 exercises. Like, no, just pick the ones that are the best bang for your buck, that are going to give you the most results from, again, we always talk insulin sensitivity, but what's going to do that the most? Your compound lifts, right? Your squats, technically your deadlifts, right? Things that are using multiple joints, which we can get into that in a second too. But those types of lifts are going to do a lot more than I'm going to stand here and do a bunch of bicep curls, which is what everybody thinks of when they think about the gym, especially when they don't go too often.
Yeah, I take it for granted, but I have to, like you, hammer home that message about compound lifts, movement patterns. It comes down to, what do humans do with their bodies in real space, like with gravity on Earth? And it's, we bend to pick things up. That's the deadlift. We squat, we push, we pull, right? And we pull in a couple different ways, overhead and pushing vertically. So what accomplishes that efficiently, that uses the most muscle mass, that uses the most natural range of motion? And that's, like you said, the big compound lifts, ideally with a barbell. And I say that because barbell's very safe. It's symmetrical. It's easy to load progressively. And you can have spotter arms and things like that to make it safe, even if you're by yourself. A lot of people get intimidated, like, oh my God, a barbell, it sounds like hardcore power lifter, I'm going to go do the machine. But you're going to save time. You're going to be able to load it. You're going to be able to progress session after session easily by doing those lifts. Agree, totally.
I think people, from, like, to your point, from barbells are scary, dumbbells are scary. They're also missing that when you're doing this, even if you're doing, for example, hey, I'm doing some sort of, bench press with a dumbbell. Well, you're getting your chest, but you're also getting all the shoulder stabilizers, and those little muscles are so hard to work outside of that. So again, that bang for your buck, and the more muscles you're recruiting, technically diabetes wise, the more you're going to be saying, hey, I'm now sensitized, not just for the next 24 hours, but some people get benefits up to 72 hours. And like what you were saying with the research, if it's that big of an increase, why would you not do it? To basically say, I'm going to keep my blood sugar better by spending 30 minutes a few times a week. You could probably do 30 minutes without even thinking about it. You're probably scrolling on your phone for at least 30 minutes a day, if not longer. I think the average person spending 4 or 5 hours on their phone or on TV per day. And I'm over here like, I would lose my mind at that point.
Yeah, it is crazy that, so I can think of a client that I've been working with for a short time now who is pretty jacked on his own, and yet he's been inefficient at getting there. And after like 10 years of lifting, we now have him stripping back to just 4 days. So for him, he was going 7 days a week, just 4 days, doing a very simple, I'll call it like a power building style program with waves. It gets a little more complicated for him versus a beginner. But he is like, man, I never knew that you could actually like push harder and harder over time like this, even though he had been able to build muscle all these years slowly. Now he's like, okay, I understand what this means to actually load it up efficiently for my time and have the time to recover, because he was missing that. He was missing the rest in between, and that's where everything responds and the stimulus occurs.
Well, and what do you think then for supersets, like given efficiency? Because some people are like, hey, I've got 30 minutes. I want to get in, you said 3, but maybe I want to get in 5 exercises. What if I went one exercise right to the next and then rested for a little bit?
I used to be against them until I found that there's science there's a study from 2014, I think. And then literally last year, the Mass team, Eric Helms and those guys put together a really nice review of like a meta-analysis sort of deal. And they showed that for isolation and accessory type lifts, supersets have the same outcome as not supersetting for hypertrophy. So you can save a ton of time with supersets when it comes to smaller lifts, especially when you're doing antagonist supersets. So like biceps, triceps, right? Or quads, hams. And I actually love that as a hack, not for everything. So if you're doing like 6 lifts for the day and your first 2 are big compound lifts, you wouldn't superset those, but then you can superset your 4 smaller lifts. So I actually am a fan of those, and I didn't used to be.
I was the exact same boat as you. I always be like, ew, why would I that sounds terrible. And then I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, you probably know who Eric Cressy, the name. Yeah. So I'd been following him since I was in high school because he did all the baseball stuff, and that was my come up. And so eventually I was like, I'm going to just work with someone on their team while it's COVID. I have access to a barbell, but that's like, I have some plates and barbells that I got when I was in high school, and I happen to be in my apartment. So let's just see what I can do. And he had everything programmed in like A1, B1, or not A1, B1, A1, A2, A3, or like B1, B2. Yep. So it was all like trisets or supersets. And I'm like, this is really weird. And I started doing it, and I realized I kind of like this. Everything got so much shorter and so much more efficient. I'm like, I can be done in 65 minutes instead of 95 minutes. I'll take that extra half hour all the time.
Man, looking for those hacks all the time. In fact, the program I'm running right now is by Jeffrey Verity Schofield. It's called the Way Jacked Machine. It's actually for beginners, but I'm tweaking it a little bit, like to challenge myself. because it does two things. It just does top set, back off set, which means you're doing 2 sets instead of 3. Most people think I got to do 3 sets, like that's the magic number. But you can actually go super heavy, modest rep range, like say 4 to 6 or 6 to 8. And then the second set, you drop the weight a little bit, crank up the reps, and then you do a third AMRAP 15 seconds later. So it still ends up being 2 sets, but the AMRAP makes you go to failure, right? And you're not doing it on every one. You're doing supersets. So you're doing A, B, and on B, you're doing the AMRAP. A, B, B, you're doing the AMRAP. So by doing 2 instead of 3, and by doing supersets, 45 minutes in and out for what would normally take 70 or 80 minutes.
That last AMRAP set, and if someone's listening, you're like, what's an AMRAP? AMRAP's as many reps as possible. So whatever you got left in the tank, you are just going. And there's a ton of different methodologies for different types of reps, but that sounds brutal.
It is. It's brutal, but it also is a good learning tool. So if you're listening and you're like, I don't know what RPE10 is, even for a little movement like a bicep curl, do your bicep curls and go to failure, then stop, then count 10 seconds, and then get more to failure. And you'll be like, oh, wow, I could probably do, if you could do like 2 more, you probably did it right. But if you do like 8 more, that shows you weren't even close to failure. That's the value.
And for failure, if you're listening, it's like, what is failure? So whether, again, this could be related to bands, this could be body weight, this could be whatever, is when you're doing an exercise and you do it so many times that you effectively cannot do another one. You physically cannot do a complete rep of another one. And to train to that point, of course, from a metabolic damage perspective, ideally, you're going to really get to the edge of what your muscle can do, and it should allow your muscle to then adapt better, grow better, and then ultimately grow more, which for, again, people with diabetes, just having muscle mass at baseline is amazing because, of course, the active lifting itself is going to help from an insulin sensitivity standpoint, but then living with just more muscle in general will also make you more insulin sensitive at baseline because muscle is a more metabolically active tissue. So when the doctor's saying, hey, go do some weights, and they're not telling you what to do or how many times to go or anything like that, just something is going to help you because by getting stronger, it doesn't matter how old you are. We've had patients that are in their 70s who are literally rock climbing and doing all sorts of crazy work while living with diabetes, doing amazing because they're able to say, hey, I've got more muscle on my body. My blood sugar, I think our A1C is like 5.7. Like that's almost non-diabetes range. So it is possible. It doesn't matter how old you are. Doesn't matter what you're doing with diabetes. Highly recommend getting into the lifting. And I want to really just go all in on the nerdy stuff now because I feel like I never get to talk about this stuff and it's fun. And there are going to be people that are like, wow, this is amazing. So with methodology,